Now, once upon a time, there were race series that basically ran road legal vehicles converted to run on tracks, and those road legal vehicles couldn't be modified much. It was essentially run what you have, but you're allowed to strip them of weight and stick a roll cage in them for safety, but tuning, aero and other bits and pieces like that were heavily restricted or just off limits completely. In fact, in the early years of the BTCC, that was indeed the case. You ran what you brought, and it wasn't until 1995 that they started relaxing the aero rules after Alfa Romeo brought the 155, but if we have time we'll get to that. But since these were race series based on production cars that any person, to an extent, could buy at any main dealer showroom in the UK, Europe, US, wherever, it meant that car companies had to build a certain amount of cars to basically prove to the authorities that the cars being run were cars that you could actually buy. And this led to the Homologation Special, cars that were produced in the bare minimum to meet the minimum production requirements to also get an advantage on the track. In some series that number was 1,000, in others 5,000, in others 10,000, and for some of these series it wouldn't be enough to just look like the road going version of the car, they had to be mechanically similar underneath as well. And nowhere else did they bend the rules with this than rally. Up until a point, Group B was basically touring cars that went sideways, for want of a better description. And while Group A was basically touring cars that went sideways, Group B had a lot more freedom. There were no restrictions on turbo boost, the weights were kept as low as possible, but they still had to be based off a road-going vehicle. And while Group A needed 5,000 units of said car to be built to be able to compete, Group B needed only 200. This rule meant that the manufacturers could build their faster, more expensive cars that offered them as much publicity as possible if they won. What the FIA basically had in mind is that they were counting on the manufacturers turning up with a road legal car at the top of the range, like, I don't know, a Golf GTI, stripping all the weight out, cranking the turbo up and then sending it on its way. But Lancia had other ideas, before Group B started in the 1980s. Lancia turned the idea on its head by building the competition car first, making 499 more to meet the minimum build requirements of what was then Group 4, and then sent it to the rallies. But building the car wasn't without its problems, because Enzo Ferrari initially didn't want the Lancia Stratos to have the Dino V6 engine, as he saw the Stratos as being a direct competitor to the Dino itself. But when production of the Dino ended, Enzo sold Lancia 500 engines to be used in the Stratos. And because the car was designed to be agile, had great visibility out the front and had a power to weight ratio of 190 horsepower per tonne, the Stratos won the 1974, 1975 and 1976 World Rally Championship, and it probably would have won more if the Fiat Group hadn't decided it wanted the 131 Abarth to have all the attention put into it instead. But Lancia apparently only built 492 Stratos HFs as the minimum build was dropped to 400 for the 1976 season, so how they got around the 500 minimum, I'll never know. Unless they went, here's the first few hundred cars, and then took the FIA officials for some coffee, and then showed them the other few hundred cars that were just the same cars in a different room. I think it was either Lancia or Ferrari who did it, but I can't remember which one it was, but that story definitely happened. And the Stratos also won the 75, 76 and 77 Monte Carlo Rally because of the short wheelbase. So rallying evolved, and the famed Group B came into effect. The Stratos was dead, but new legends emerged, and rally went Homologation Special crazy. In 1979, the FIA legalised four-wheel drive, and nobody was really keen on using it because they felt it was too heavy, too technical, and would be too much of a performance hit despite the gains in grip. But then Audi changed all of that when it brought one single word to the World Rally Championship in 1980. Quattro. Audi built a road-going four-wheel drive car and then used it in the World Rally Championship. It was a 5-cylinder turbo that taught everybody a new one, and they did exactly the same thing in the BTCC in 1996 with a four-wheel drive car that was immediately banned. And it was designed as an exclusive car, but success and demand meant that Audi ended up building 11,500 Quattros between 1980 and 1991, and a similar thing happened with the Lancia Delta Integrale. Lancia continued building the standard Delta variant as opposed to the tuned rally spec one. Probably not a term I should be using at this point in time, is it? And a Quattro is highly sought after these days, an original one that is. There's one on sale right now for £95,000. I need more views. And yes, Audi did dominate, but it didn't initially. It was entered as a prototype in 1980, which was allowed, and then struggled on tarmac in 1981 because it handled like a canal boat with the four-wheel drive system. And then in 1982, when Group B became official, it ran without any modifications as there were changes allowed to where the engine could be. But then, it won the title in 1983 and 1984. Well, it won the driver's title in 1984. Lancia won the constructors in 84 with the 037 that was loosely based off the Monte Carlo. Audi exploited a hole in the rulebook for 1984. The A2 Quattro took advantage of this loophole that was designed to give naturally aspirated engines a chance against these turbo-powered monsters that were entering all forms of motorsport at the time. Because it was a 2.14 litre engine, you done? Because it was a 2.14 litre engine, the previous A1 was in the 3 litre to 3.9 litre category, where the minimum weight was 1.1 tonnes. Audi then shortened the stroke from 79.5 to 79.3mm, and that dropped the A2 into the category below, where the minimum weight was 960 kilos, so it could run a lighter car with a more powerful engine. Sort of. Peugeot did the same exploit in 1985 and 1986 with the 205 T16, which was a program oversaw by a Monsieur Jean Todt, and the success of that 205 effectively saved Peugeot from ruin. So Lancia took their "we will build our competition car on the road" mentality even further by taking the Delta road car and injecting it with steroids. The S4 was the ultimate middle finger, featuring a 1.8 litre inline-4 that combined supercharging and turbocharging to get as much turbo lag eliminated as possible. As a result, it was over double the engine power of the cars that had entered Group B in 1982, with a 500 horsepower engine in a car that was 4 metres long and weighed just 890 kilos. And since the wheelbase was so short, its Scandinavian flicked through the tightest of corners with ease. And like the 205 T16, it was a silhouette racer for marketing purposes, as opposed to being pure homologation special like the Stratos was, and this was allowed by the rules, but it shared enough of the characteristics of the Delta to be allowed to be used. Group B rules permitted the moving of the engine, the use of high-tech materials like carbon fibre, and like mentioned before, it allowed companies to use cars based off the road-going versions, silhouette cars, to be used for marketing while still meeting the minimum build requirements of the original Lancia Delta, if that makes sense. It's a bit like how the BTCC is today. They're not the actual cars, but they look close enough to what they should be to know that that's an Astra, that's a Focus, that's a 3 Series. Despite this car being quick, it was immensely fragile. Lancia had to do a full rebuild after each rally and had to resort to using the old 037 at the Safari Rally of 1986. And there were also complaints that the drivers were getting too hot because the engine was acting like the world's fastest storage heater. And there was the throttle that would get stuck to the composite floor, which was dangerous to say the least. And that's probably what resulted in the accident that killed Group B, quite literally killed Group B. Henri Toivonen and his co-driver Sergio Cresto crashed out of the Tour de Corsa in the May of 1986, flipping over a wall and rolling down a bank where the car then caught fire when tree branches punctured the aluminium fuel tank, and the fuel was ignited by the hot engine or the hot transmission, depending on which story you read. To add insult to injury, Lancia had actually removed the skid plates to save weight, and that in turn allowed outside objects to get into the car. So Group B became Group A, which was modified production cars in rally and touring cars, but a minimum of 2,500 cars had to be produced of 25,000 overall of the entire model. So to use modern cars, let's say 2,500 Ford Focus RS's of 25,000 Ford Focuses of all trim levels. So Lancia evolved the S4 into the Delta Integrale, which went on to win 6 WRC Constructors titles, making it the most successful rally car of all time. However, if you added the word evolution to the name of the model, so Ford Focus Evolution, that number became 500. But that's not to mean that homologation specials weren't still produced by companies looking to get their road legal car into a competitive situation on the track. But there was also the Toyota Celica GT4 that got disqualified from the 1995 World Rally Championship for the dodgy turbo restrictor, and there was the boy racers' favourites, the Subaru Impreza WRX and the Mitsubishi Lancer Evolution, the Evo 6 being the last of these homologation specials to win the WRC. Not all the manufacturers who built 500 models actually sold 500 models. Some companies built 500 and then used them as sources of parts or stripped them down to convert them to regular models, which Volvo did with 477 of the 240 Turbo in 1985. To the point where Volvo had to hand over the names of every single person who bought one of these Evo 240 Turbos to the FIA to be allowed to compete, which wouldn't happen today because of GDPR. And a similar thing happened with Holden down in Australia with a homologation special for Bathurst or something like that. But unfortunately, homologation specials aren't exactly a thing these days, and the market for these older vehicles is now to a point where the prices are ever going to go up. Like I said, there's an Audi Quattro for sale for 95 grand. But as a car lover, seeing an old Quattro, a WRX Impreza, or even a 205 Turbo, it does make you feel a bit warm and fuzzy inside, and you wonder what those things must have been like on a track or a rally stage. So, a video on when motorsport went homologation special mad. Obviously, I've not been able to cover every single homologation special ever made in history because we'd be here all day, but let me know what your favourite one is down in the comments and discuss away as to which one was best. I mean, it's the RS Cosworth, obviously. And while scrolling down, if you enjoyed the video, give it a like, and for more like this, hit subscribe with the bell on so you get all the latest. As ever, a big thanks to the good folk of Patreon, and if you wish to join them or just join in all the Discord stuff, I'll leave all relevant links down in the description box for you. So until next time, I've been Millward, have a great day wherever you are, and I'll see you all again soon for another video. So until then, goodbye.